You have never actually lived inside a house. That might sound like a strange thing to say, especially if you're currently sitting on a couch, surrounded by four walls and a roof that you probably pay way too much money for every month. But if we're being honest, you don't live in a house. You live in a climate-controlled box that's been surgically separated from the rest of the planet. We spend about 90% of our lives indoors, buffered by drywall and fiberglass insulation, treating the actual outdoors like a high-definition screensaver that we occasionally walk through to get to our cars. We have become so dependent on these permanent shells that we've forgotten a fundamental truth about our own species. For more than 99% of our history, home wasn't a place you stayed, it was something you carried with you, or something you borrowed from the earth for a night before moving on. We tend to look back at our ancestors and feel a certain kind of pity, picturing them huddled in the mud, shivering and miserable, just waiting for someone to finally invent the brick. But that's a massive misunderstanding of how we got here. Ancient humans weren't just surviving without houses, they were thriving across every conceivable environment on Earth using a system of survival so sophisticated that most of us wouldn't last 48 hours trying to replicate it. Think about the last time you felt truly cozy. Maybe it was a rainy Sunday, and you were tucked under a heavy wool blanket with a hot drink. There's a very specific, deep-seated psychological satisfy in that feeling. It's not just about the temperature. It's about the scale. Evolutionary psychologists, like J. Appleton, who proposed the prospect and refuge theory back in the 1970s, suggest that our brains are hardwired to crave spaces where we can see the world without being seen. We love a good nook. We love window seats and alcoves. When you were a kid and you built a fort out of sofa cushions and bedsheets, you weren't just playing, you were running a simulation of the Paleolithic lifestyle. You were creating a refuge. In a giant, open-plan modern house, we often feel a weird sense of exposure, which is why we gravitate towards smaller rooms or tuck ourselves into corners. Our ancestors lived their entire lives in that blanket fort headspace. They understood that the secret to staying alive wasn't building a massive fortress to fight the environment, but rather creating a series of small, efficient microclimates that could be managed with almost zero resources. But surely, a cave is just a house made of thicker stone, right? Actually, thinking of it that way misses the entire point of thermal physics. We have this cartoonish image of the caveman, but the reality is that caves were the luxury real estate of the ancient world, and they were incredibly rare. If you found a good one, you didn't just squat in it, you engineered it. Take the Bruniquel Cave in southern France. Back in the 1990s, researchers found something that completely shattered our ideas about early humans, specifically Neanderthals. Over 300 meters deep inside the cave, where it is pitch black and silent, they found two large ring structures made from nearly 400 broken stalagmites, all stacked neatly like low walls. This wasn't a natural formation. This was a construction project from 176,000 years ago. These weren't houses in the sense of having a bedroom and a kitchen, but they were defined, controlled spaces. These rings likely supported structures or acted as focal points for fires. What's fascinating is that the temperature inside a deep cave like Bruniquel stays at a constant, stable level regardless of what's happening outside. It's the ultimate thermal battery. While the outside world might be swinging between 40 degrees and -10, the cave stays at a steady 55. Our ancestors weren't just hiding in caves. They were leveraging the thermal mass of the planet itself to bypass the need for a furnace. However, most people couldn't find a cave if their life depended on it, so they had to invent the mammoth-sized equivalent of a Lego set. When you move out of the rocky valleys and into the open plains of the Eurasian steppe, the Earth stops giving you free walls. This is where ancient human engineering really starts to look like something out of a sci-fi movie. Imagine you're on the plains of what is now Ukraine, about 15,000 years ago. There are no trees for miles. The wind is a literal killer. What do? You look at the largest thing in the landscape, the woolly mammoth. At the Mezirich site, archaeologists uncovered a cluster of dwellings that are masterpieces of structural engineering. Each house was built using the bones of about 95 different mammoths. But they weren't just piles of bone. They were architectural. The foundations were made of massive mammoth mandibles, the lower jaws, interlocked in a circular pattern. Above that, They used the tusks to create arched roof supports, which were then covered in heavy animal hides and likely insulated with thick layers of sod or moss. Each structure weighed about 20 tons. These weren't temporary lean-tos, they were sophisticated, semi-permanent hubs. They were using the specific weights and shapes of bones the way a modern architect uses I-beams and reinforced concrete. They turned the remains of their prey into the very thing that protected them from the next storm. It's the ultimate form of upcycling, but with the added benefit of being perfectly suited to a landscape where timber didn't exist. And while a bone hut sounds sturdy, it's useless the moment you step outside to go hunting. This is where we have to reframe what we think of as shelter. To an ancient human, a house wasn't a building. A house was the first 3 inches of space surrounding your skin. We talk about clothing as fashion, but for the vast majority of human history, clothing was wearable architecture. If you have the right clothing, the entire world becomes your living room. Take the Sungir site in Russia, dating back about 34,000 years. Archaeologists found the remains of people buried in what can only be described as high-performance Arctic gear. They were wearing tailored trousers, shirts, and parkas made of fur and hide, and they were decorated with thousands of ivory beads. This wasn't just decorative, the beads added weight and wind resistance, but the tailoring is the real genius. Unlike the draped pelt look you see in movies, these clothes were fitted to the body to minimize the volume of air the body had to heat. It's the same principle as a modern sleeping bag. By keeping that layer of warm air trapped directly against the skin, they could remain mobile in temperatures that would kill a naked human in minutes. In 2009, researchers in the Dzudzwana cave in the Republic of Georgia found something even more mind-blowing: microscopic flax fibers that had been dyed pink, turquoise, and black, dating back 36,000 years. This means that tens of thousands of years before the first house was ever built, humans were already masters of textile chemistry and complex weaving. We weren't just wrapping up, we were creating customized, portable environments that allowed us to ignore the weather entirely. But even the best parka can't save you if your internal furnace isn't running at full blast, which brings us to a biological secret that modern humans have almost completely lost. You actually have a built-in house inside your own body. It's called brown adipose tissue or brown fat. Unlike the white fat that most of us are trying to lose at the gym, brown fat is packed with mitochondria. Its sole purpose isn't to store energy, but to burn it specifically to generate heat. It's like having a space heater tucked behind your shoulder blades. Studies on modern indigenous populations, like the Inuit or the Evenki people of Siberia, show that they often have much higher metabolic rates and more active brown fat than people living in temperate urban environments. A study published in 2014 by researchers at the University of Cambridge looked at how the human body adapts to extreme cold and found that our ancestors likely possessed a much more robust, non-shivering thermogenesis capability. They didn't need a thermostat because their bodies were the thermostat. When we lived without houses, our biology stayed sharp. We were metabolically flexible. Today, because we live in a constant 72-degree bubble, our bodies have forgotten how to do this. We've outsourced our internal heat to the local power grid, making us biologically soft in a way that would have been baffling to an ancient hunter-gatherer. They didn't just survive the cold, their bodies were literally built to thrive in it. Yet, even with high-performance brown fat and mammoth bone huts, there is one technology that acted as the glue for all ancient living: the social fire. We tend to think of fire as just a way to cook meat or stay warm, but its role in ancient housing was actually psychological and structural. Dr. Polly Wiesner, an anthropologist from the University of Utah, conducted a fascinating study in 2014 where she analyzed the conversations of the Jew/Hawansi Bushmen in Botswana. She found a massive difference between daylight talk and firelight talk. During the day, conversations were about work, logistics, and gossip. But at night, gathered around the fire, the talk shifted to storytelling, mythology, and social bonding. The fire didn't just provide heat, it created a social hearth. It defined the boundaries of the home even when there were no walls. In a very real sense, the fire was the house. It was the center point that everyone faced, the place where the we was defined. You could be in the middle of a vast, dark forest, but if you had a fire and your group was circled around it, you were home. This is why even today, we find it so relaxing to sit around a campfire or even just stare at a fireplace in a living room. It's a deep, ancestral signal that the refuge is active. The fire was the ultimate multi-tool. It provided light, heat, protection from predators, a way to harden tools, and a way to digest food that would otherwise be toxic. It was the engine of the ancient household, and it worked anywhere on the planet. Despite how well this all worked, you might be wondering why we ever bothered to stop. If we had portable bone mansions, high-tech fur parkas, and internal space heaters, why did we decide to settle down into the cramped, stationary, mold-prone boxes we live in now? The answer isn't that houses were better, it's that our lifestyle changed in a way that made portability a liability. About 10,000 years ago, during the Neolithic Revolution, we started experimenting with agriculture. Once you plant a field of wheat, you are shackled to that specific patch of dirt. You can't pack up your field and move it across the steppe when the seasons change. The house, as we know it, the permanent, heavy, fixed structure, wasn't an upgrade. In comfort, it was a storage locker for our stuff. We needed a place to keep the grain, a place to keep the animals, and a place to defend against the neighbors who might want to steal that grain. We traded the freedom of the entire planet for the security of a few square meters. And in that trade, we lost something profound. We lost our intimate connection to the landscape's rhythm. We stopped knowing which way the wind was blowing at night. We stopped hearing the sounds of the predators moving in the brush. We traded the biophilic home, a home that was part of the living world, for a lithic home, a home made of dead stone and dried wood. But you have to wonder, have we actually moved that far away from our ancient roots, or are we just pretending? Think about your own home for a second. Why do we put rugs on the floor? It's a vestigial memory of the animal hides our ancestors laid down to insulate against the cold earth. Why do we love reclaimed wood and natural stone countertops? Because we're trying to trick our Paleolithic brains into thinking we're still connected to the forest and the cave. We spend thousands of dollars on outdoor living spaces, building fire pits in our backyards just so we can sit in the dark and stare at the flames for 20 minutes before going back inside to look at a glowing rectangle. We are a species that evolved to live in the open, and we're currently conducting a massive, 10,000-year-long experiment to see if we can handle living in a box. The cozy feeling you get when you're wrapped in a blanket while a storm rages outside? That's not a modern feeling. That is the ghost of an ancestor sitting in a mammoth bone hut at Mezirich, listening to the wind howl across the tundra, knowing that as long as the fire was banked and the tusks were sturdy, they were the masters of their world. It's actually quite funny when you think about it. We've spent billions of dollars and centuries of effort trying to perfect the smart home, with its automated lights and voice-controlled thermostats, all to replicate the same basic sensations that were free to any human 30,000 years ago. We want the perfect temperature, the perfect lighting, and a sense of total security. But there's a cost to that perfection. When you remove all the friction from your environment, you also remove the stimulus that makes you feel alive. Our ancestors lived in a state of constant, dynamic engagement with their shelter. If the wind changed, they moved the hide flap. If the fire got low, they added wood. If the season turned, they walked 500 miles to a better valley. They were participants in their own survival. Today, we are spectators. We pay our utility bills and hope the grid doesn't go down because if it does, most of us don't even know which direction the wind usually comes from, let alone how to build a windbreak out of the materials in our backyard. We've traded competence for convenience, and we call it progress. If you've ever had that strange urge to go camping, to leave the comfort of your bed and sleep on the hard ground in a nylon tent, you're feeling the itch. It's your ancient DNA reminding you that you were never meant to be a stationary creature. There is a specific kind of clarity that comes from being outside at 3 in the morning, feeling the chill on your face while the rest of your body is warm inside a sleeping bag. In that moment, the distance between you and a human from 40,000 years ago vanishes. You're using the same physics, the same biology, and the same psychology. You're realizing that shelter isn't a place, it's a set of skills. It's the ability to read the clouds, to understand the thermal properties of a rock overhang, and to know exactly how to layer your clothing so you don't sweat. Because in the ancient world, sweat was a death sentence when the temperature dropped. This knowledge was the most valuable thing we ever owned, and we passed it down for thousands of generations, only to let it wither away in the last few centuries. But even if we don't use those skills anymore, they've left a permanent mark on our culture. Think about our most sacred spaces. Most cathedrals and temples are designed to feel like artificial caves, high, vaulted ceilings that echo, dim lighting, and massive stone walls that create a sense of eternal stability. We use architecture to evoke the same sense of awe and safety that our ancestors felt when they entered a deep, dry cavern for the first time. Our modern world is just a very complex, very expensive echo of the Paleolithic. We haven't really changed what we need, we've just changed how we get it. We still need the refuge. We still need the hearth. We still need the group. We've just replaced the mammoth bones with steel girders and the campfire with a flat-screen TV. But the soul of the home remains exactly the same. It's the place where the world stops being dangerous for a little while. So, the next time you look at a picture of a primitive shelter, don't look at it as a failure of technology. Look at it as a masterpiece of adaptation. Those people weren't homeless. They were the most at-home humans have ever been, because they were home everywhere. They didn't need to own a piece of land to feel secure, they owned the knowledge of how to live on all land. They were the ultimate generalists, capable of turning a handful of sticks, a few animal skins, and a well-placed fire into a fortress that could withstand an ice age. We might have better plumbing and faster internet, but they had a level of environmental mastery that we can barely imagine. They lived in a world without fences, without mortgages, and without boundaries, and they did it by turning the entire planet into their living room. Actually, it's worth asking yourself, who is more secure? The person who needs a massive, complex, energy-hungry infrastructure just to stay warm at night, or the person who can walk into a forest with nothing but a stone knife and be perfectly cozy by sundown? We've built a world that is incredibly comfortable, but also incredibly fragile. We depend on thousands of strangers to keep the lights on and the water running. Our ancestors depended on themselves and their kin. Their houses were built of bone and hide, but they were rooted in a deep, unbreakable understanding of the natural world. They didn't live without houses. They lived with a version of housing that was so efficient and so portable that it allowed them to conquer the entire globe before we even figured out how to write. I'd love to know, have you ever had a moment where a primitive setup, like a tent, a cabin, or even a well-made blanket fort, felt more like home than your actual house? What is it about those small, enclosed spaces that makes us feel so safe? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. It's a weirdly universal human experience, and I suspect it's because we're all still just Paleolithic hunters who happen to be wearing modern clothes. If you enjoy digging into these kinds of deep history rabbit holes and exploring how our past still dictates our present, I'd love to have you along for the ride. Hit that subscribe button and join our little social hearth here. We're constantly looking for those hidden threads that connect our modern lives to the wild world we left behind, and there are plenty more mysteries to uncover. Because at the end of the day, we have to face a very cold, very undeniable fact that most of us spend our entire lives trying to ignore. Your house is a temporary illusion. You are a tropical, hairless primate that has managed to trick itself into thinking it belongs in the suburbs. But if the power goes out, the fuel runs dry, and the grocery store shelves go empty, your four walls won't save you. You are still that same creature from 30,000 years ago, standing on a freezing plain, and the only thing that has ever truly kept you safe isn't the building you're sitting in, but the fire you carry inside you and the knowledge of how to keep it burning. You aren't a resident of a city, you are a guest of the elements, and the elements always, eventually, come back to collect the rent.